Meeting of the North Fair Oaks Community Council to order. We'll begin with a roll call. Again,
Commencing roll call now. Vice Chair Blair Whitney,
here.
Councilmember Juan Carlos Prado,
Here.
Councilmember Everardo Rodriguez, Councilmember Jennifer Reese, Councilmember Nick Cersei,
Here.
Councilmember Kathleen Valley, here. Councilmember George Lemon,
Here.
Chair Brooke Lesser.
Here.
Thank you. We do have a brief announcement. We do have an interpreter joining us this evening. If you would like to access this meeting in Spanish, please use the headsets provided. And Teresa, would you like to provide these instructions in Spanish?
Yes. Interpretación en vivo. Un breve anuncio. Tenemos un intérprete que se unirá a nosotros esta noche. Si desea acceder a esta reunión en español, utilice los auriculares proporcionados en la mesa de registro. Gracias.
Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Teresa Menteville.
Teresa, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Public comments. Anyone may speak up to 2 minutes on any topic not on the agenda. If you wish to do so, please fill out some paper stuff. Please note that the council may not discuss or take action on items not on the agenda. Have any public comments?
Last call for public comment. There are no public comments at this time. Back to you, Chair.
Agenda item number 3, a recommendation for 413 6th Avenue for a minor subdivision, subdivide the existing 12,007 square foot parcel in one 6,003 square foot, one 6,004 square foot lot. The existing single family residence will be demolished as part of this project. This agenda item is timed for 20 minutes. The presentation will be given by Catherine Castro Rivera. Assuming Catherine's on.
Yes, hi, thank you. Just a moment to pull up my presentation here. Is my presentation on screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, council members. We're here seeking the North Fair Oaks Community Council's recommendation for a minor subdivision of a 12,007 square foot parcel at 413 6th Avenue. The parcel will be subdivided into one 6,003 square foot lot and one 6,004 square foot lot. The applicant, Danny Lai, may be joining us and may be able to answer some questions as well. In this presentation, I will be going over the project description, the project location, the project's compliance with the regulations, and finally requesting council's recommendation. The applicant seeks to subdivide a 12,007 square foot lot into 2 parcels, resulting in one parcel of 6,003 square feet and the other 6,004 square feet. And the existing single family residence will be demolished as part of this project. The parcel fronts 6th Street and is located northeasterly of Middlefield Road. Currently, the project is developed with a single-story, single-family residence and a detached garage, which are proposed to be demolished, both structures. Here's the site plan, and as previously stated, the resulting parcels will be the 6,003 square feet here and 6,004 square feet to the right. And they both have the potential to accommodate 2 new single-family homes as shown on the site plan. Access for both parcels will be taken directly from 6th Avenue, and there are a few trees proposed for removal as part of the project in order to accommodate one of the driveways and a water meter. Municipal water and sewer service will be provided by Cal Water and Fair Oaks Sewer Maintenance District, And the project as proposed has been reviewed and approved by all impacted agencies. The project conforms with both the general plan and North Fair Oaks Community Plan land use designation of medium density residential. The project is also consistent with the land use designation and housing chapters of the North Fair Oaks Community Plan. Granting this subdivision would result in 2 parcels that can support future development of single-family residences that can comply with the zoning district standards. This parcel is zoned R1 S73 for one-family residential, density district 73. The project is proposed as in compliance with the county subdivision regulations, and all findings can be made. Staff seeks the council's recommendation on this minor subdivision of a 12,000 square foot parcel that will result in 2 parcels that can accommodate single family homes. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Are there any questions from council members for Catherine? Catherine, please go ahead.
Yeah, no surprise here, but if we could go back to the plan. Split 2 slides, something like that. I noticed that for the lot 2, the driveway looks like it's going through some trees and things. Is there the possibility to maybe rework the plan a little bit so that the trees do not need to be removed?
The tree right in front of the garage is a 41-inch redwood tree, which is actually an arborist report was submitted, and this tree is actually dead, and it is recommended to be removed as soon as possible to avoid it becoming a hazard. Since it is right in front of the garage, it looks like we wouldn't be able to relocate the driveway in any configuration that wouldn't affect the tree. As far as the 2 trees in the right of way, it is possible that the driveway could be reconfigured so as to avoid the removal of the tree on the left. But as you can see, the driveway will require access directly from where the tree on the right is located. And it looks like we wouldn't be able to prevent the removal.
Basically, you're saying that there's no room to change the plan. Is that what I'm understanding?
There is room to potentially reconfigure so that the tree on the left is not affected, but it doesn't look like we could reconfigure it so that that tree right in front of the driveway access can be saved.
And do you know what type of tree that is?
It is, you can give me 1 second to just pull it up here. It's a London plane tree. Both of the trees in the right of way are London plane.
I also noticed that there's some room, looks like a dry well or something like that. Is this to address any drainage concerns or issues, especially given the water runoffs that we've had and things like that?
My understanding is that the dry well is a drainage measure, but this will have to be reviewed more thoroughly during the building permit stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from other council members?
I have a question. Given that this is a 1/4 acre, are the setbacks being met? Looking at the current configuration of the design plan?
Yes, all applicable design standards can be met with this proposed development, and all setbacks should be compliant.
One other question. So in this is just to divide the lot. There's no actual plans for the residences to be built. Is that correct?
Pending the approval of the subdivision, the applicant will be submitting a building permit for the 2 single-family homes.
So yes, as of right now, this is just the subdivision, not the actual houses that will be built on property. Okay.
Yes, this is just the subdivision plan.
Other council members, questions? Catherine, has there been any feedback from the neighbors with regard to this proposal?
I have not received any comments from our noticing on March 13th.
And how many neighbors have been notified, or what was the notification?
It was all neighbors within a 300-foot radius.
Please,
It's
Catherine,
not
go ahead.
particularly relevant to this, but does North Fair Oaks have any restrictions on Airbnbs? In terms of lots being split like that and they becoming Airbnbs and not really housing? Good question.
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in on this. Justin Mace, Deputy County Executive. We do have a short-term rental ordinance pilot program. It is currently only available, and Mr. Fox, please correct me if I say anything incorrect, on the coast side. So right now, there is no permit program for short-term rentals in North Fair Oaks.
Other questions from council members? I have one more, Catherine. Would this project have been allowed before SB 9 passed? In other words, does the lot split? Obviously, the lot split has to conform under SB 9, but would it have been permissible prior to the passage of SB 9 in terms of setbacks and things like that? I'm just asking because I suspect that at some point we're going to see SB 9 lot splits, and I was just wondering if this might be our first, actually.
Yes, the lot split would have been allowed prior to SB 9. This project isn't being pursued using that legislation. It is just our standard subdivision process.
So both of these houses could be sold after the lot split, is that correct?
That's correct. There is no deed restriction like there is for SB 9.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
have another question.
Please, Juan Carlos.
Given the dimensions of the lot, if they split at 6,000 square feet, which then would make them larger than the average, which is 5,000. Could these properties, if developed, then be multiple dwellings each lot? Could they be turned into multiple units?
Because of the zoning that this parcel is zoned for one-family residential, it does not permit multifamily units without a use permit. But it is likely that that the proposed project can accommodate ADUs, one for each residence.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council members? Called in for public comment.
No public comments at this time, but you, Jen.
There's no public comment, then I will entertain a motion to approve the recommendation for the minor subdivision at 413 6th Avenue. Oh, I was entertaining, so I need someone to make the motion, actually.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Don't need a roll call for this, is that correct, Tim? You just
That's
do show of hands.
For in-person meetings, the vote can be called by any means appropriate in the eyes of the chair.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Catherine, for your presentation tonight.
Thank you, council members.
Agenda item number 4, consideration of proposed draft of the North Fair Oaks rezoning and general plan amendment. We have 35 minutes for this agenda item, and the presentation is going to be by Will Gibson of Planning and Building. There he is. How are you doing this evening, Will? You're on mute, right?
My apologies. You should be hearing me now. I'm doing well. Thank you very much. I hope everyone up in there in person is doing well as well. I will just be introducing Matt Tacker from our consultant team. He has been having a little audio issue, but I think it is resolved now. And he'll be giving the bulk of the presentation, but I just wanted to thank the council for hearing us tonight. And just note that we are coming very soon to the close of this fairly extensive rezoning project. And we would like to get as much input in the last phases from the council as we can. I do know that there are some new members who may have been less familiar with the project. So hopefully this will help everyone be up to speed and be able to have appropriate input. And then we will have other opportunities to come back to the council if the council deems fit. But we are in the wrapping up stages as we reach you now. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt, and hopefully, Matt, you are able to speak and hear at this point. And you are on mute.
Let's try that.
There you are. Thank you very much.
Okay, very good. I've had a few technical issues working off of two machines. One is at the office, one is at home, so bear with me. Okay. Well.
Matt, if you'd like, I can share the presentation on my screen and go through it as you speak, just because it does seem like you're still having a bit of an issue. So you want to unshare, I'll share and bring it up.
Great, thanks, Will.
Sure.
Well, it's great to be here tonight. We started this project at the beginning of last year. We've worked very closely with a technical advisory committee. We've been here a couple times at some milestones along the way. And we are here tonight to talk about the draft rezoning language, as well as amendments to the community plan. Tonight, we'll talk a little bit, we'll recap the project purpose. We will give a little overview of the outreach and engagement. Sorry, I have an echo. Project context, organization of chapters, use regulations, and so forth. Why don't we just move right into the show? Here's our core team: County Planning and Building Department, Wallace, Robertson, Todd. We were the prime consultant, supported by a number of sub-consultants, and particularly Rincon Consultants, which is doing the EIR. Next. Here are our technical advisory committee members. We had 7 meetings, and a shout out to Brooks, and I think Blair may be at this meeting also. Thank you for your contributions on the way. Next. Project purpose is amendments to the existing mixed-use zoning. Those amendments are necessary for consistency with state law, for greater clarity, ease of administration. There is also recommended a rezoning of residentially zoned parcels to mixed use. So those are parcels that are adjacent to your mixed use districts. We'll look at a map in a moment. And those would be upzoned to mixed use. Amendments to the community plan. Those are necessary for consistency. Just a little cleanup there. And then the environmental analysis is coming along, and we expect to be able to publish the draft EIR in April. Next. Here's some examples of development in the area, just showing these briefly, just to point out how tight really your sites are, these urban infill sites. A friend of mine who's an architect characterizes these kinds of ground floor plans as designing a Swiss watch where everything has to fit just right. And so that's kind of what you're up against as far as encouraging residential growth in the area. Next. Outreach and engagement. We were supported by Nostra Casa. Wow, what a really wonderful community-based organization. And they are deeply rooted in North Fair Oaks, both bilingual, relatable. And we did focus groups to kick off and cite and figure out the issues. And then there were a number of direct engagement events, the North Fair Oaks Festival, some pop-ups, both several months ago when we administered a survey, and then recently in the last couple of weeks, and then also in the last couple of weeks, direct door-to-door outreach. So every door should have received a flyer, and where somebody was home or at the business and all, they actually, Tricasa, their promotoras, their representatives actually had a conversation, and there was an opportunity for comment. Also, as I mentioned, the survey was administered a few months ago, and we got very high response rate, 225 surveys, I think. Next, please. Project context, I think you know it well by now, but there you can see it nested within the community plan, looking at the mixed use areas, these 5 mixed use areas that are along Middlefield Road and El Camino Real. And then you can see where the arrows point. The orange and the yellow parcels are the parcels that are proposed to rezone. Next. Existing land uses, just a few slides on context. The dark red is mixed use, red is commercial. So you can see there's a concentration of ground floor commercial uses along Middlefield, where it gets close to semicircular, roughly between First Avenue and semicircular. Fifth Avenue has commercial uses also, but along the remainder of Middlefield and along most of El Camino Real, it's really what's called eclectic, a wide variety of uses. Let's look at some slides here next. And fairly low intensity. So along Middlefield, kind of gives you a sense, mix of light industrial, 1-story commercial properties, auto serving businesses next. And then along El Camino and Fifth Avenue, along El Camino, kind of similarly, and it's beginning to fill in. That's the Sunrise Assisted Living project that's fairly recent. And then it's a few instances where there's some ground floor facing commercial along Fifth Avenue next. So we were asked by the Technical Advisory Committee to take a hard look at what the pattern of redevelopment might be. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't say it exactly, but a couple indicators for where development is more likely is where the floor area ratio is low. That's the amount of floor area for a given site, or when the county's assessed value is low, meaning that to develop that site means that there would be a larger upside to the future development. So those are in green. The more developable, again, it's qualitative and it's quite conjectural, but it still gives you some sense of the green areas are more likely to develop. They had both low FAR and low assessed value. The yellow are either lower FAR or low assessed value, and then the pink is neither. So the pink is the more stable uses. And kind of roughly a third of the land area falls into each. Next. And then the Technical Advisory Committee also asked us to also think about what the implications of adding these residentially zoned parcels to the mixed use zoning might be. So what you see here is the residentially zoned parcels proposed for rezoning. They're highlighted. You can get a sense of how much green there is. And then also, if you can make it out, there's these black bars along Middlefield and black bars along El Camino Real. And those are where you've got ground floor commercial establishments. Let's call them Main Street-like pedestrian-oriented commercial establishments. And those are kind of the mom and pop commercial businesses where there's sensitivity to having those redeveloped. And there would be some instances where that might occur, but certainly not everywhere. As a consequence of this rezoning, for instance, along Middlefield, where you see the most continuous set of black bars between, I guess it's about 3rd Avenue and Semicircular Road. Really, the rezoning will have no effect, or would have no effect, and limited effect in the other locations. Next. So the organization of the chapters, there was a lot of cleanup to do, in large part because of the history of how the zoning was adopted. I think the original NMU area, that pedestrian-friendly commercial stretch of Middlefield, I think was the first area that received kind of special attention, and then subsequent to that, the community plan was adopted. The mixed-use area zones were developed after that, and there's a chapter that deals with all neighborhood mixed use throughout the county also. So we consolidated things in 5 chapters, one for each of the zoning districts, where everything that you need to know appears in each chapter. So you don't have to be, flipping between pages, trying to figure out, where that citation sits and so forth. So, within each chapter, then we've got the use regulations, the development standards, the design standards, and the design standards were pulled from a variety of chapters. That's where the most integration had to occur. Performance standards, that's cleanup and making it consistent with other sources, and parking standards. We'll talk about each one of those briefly. Next. So the use regulations, again, that NMU zone, that came first, so there were some inconsistencies, really not of substantive concern, honestly. But you can see the cleanup. Allowed is permitted, allowed with use permitted. It's probably a good time to just make clear this distinction between, as permitted, sometimes called by right, where you wouldn't have to have a use permit, and certain types of housing projects when they have, when they're qualified affordable housing projects, they need to be streamlined, so they are by right. So what we're trying to do is make sure that there is a by right path for projects that you want to have where housing is proposed that fits into that category. So again, trying to make sure there's a by right path. And then for other things where you want to retain discretion, that's would be allowed with a use permit. So use permit is what means that it would be referred and there'd be discussion and so forth. So things like massage parlors, hotels, and also what not noted here would be like office projects, office only projects would fall into that category. And housing only projects would fall into that category in certain locations under proposal. And we'll look at those in a minute. Because in some places we want to retain the ground floor commercial continuity. We'll come back to it next. So the ground floor, here it is, ground floor use by right. Let me start with the green. The green is places where the by right requires a ground floor commercial use. So those are in locations where you already have, or you want to cultivate a sense of a main street, a walkable, pedestrian-oriented district. In the other locations, we're recommending that residential be allowed on the ground floor. So those would be the locations where the red arrows are pointing. Residential would be allowed on the ground floor by right. Residential would be allowed on the ground floor where there's the green, but that would be with a use permit. So that triggers a discretionary review process. Doesn't mean you couldn't do it, but you'd have to go through some extra hurdles and you wouldn't be able to move something for ministerial approval through. So next, development standards. All this stuff is on the website, by the way. The website, I think, is actually a pretty great resource to see all of this stuff and find it. So this is a table that we did early on that summarizes the maximum height, maximum floor area ratio, what the residential density is. Residential densities come from the community plan. And importantly, there's no change to height, density, or floor area ratio maximums. Okay. There are those residentially zoned parcels, which if rezoned, of course, that would increase the allowable height, density, and FAR. But otherwise, the mixed use districts, there's no change. Okay, next. Then we work with the technical advisory committee to fine tune the development envelope standards. Development envelope means the height and the setback, both front and back, side. And we heard concerns on the committee about we heard concerns from the committee along the edge along Huntington. That would be a new edge. That would be a consequence of rezoning the residentially zoned parcels along Huntington, and wanting some space for some landscaping and a step back so that it's keeping it's better mirroring the scale of the residential buildings across the street. Otherwise, the front would be no setback, which is appropriate to a urban infill location where you have small parcels, and just getting everything to fit is going to be a challenge. But 10-foot setback in the rear, which is enough to have a maintained landscape strip, and then a 20-foot setback as you go up, which then means that you're 40 feet away from your neighbor, which is good for privacy. So being sensitive to privacy. And the location where it goes from a setback, the 10-foot to the 20-foot step back, is 20 feet up, and that's about the size of a podium. So what does that mean? That means that the ground floor, in order to have commercial use or parking on the ground floor, you have to have a concrete lid on that called a podium, and then you build with either wood or steel studs on top of that. So what you see here reflects the way things actually get built. Actually. Allowable projections. I think I'll just start going more quickly because we're really very eager to hear your comments. That there's ways to project out, awning, signage, balconies, eaves. Some of these features are requirements. Some percentage of the facade, for instance, needs to have some sort of projection, so you wouldn't get just super flat facades without any relief. So there'd be a little bit of in and out. One of the factors though also to note though is that if you wanted to pop one of these things out into the right of way, you'd have to get an encroachment permit. Next. And then cleaned up to improve the standards that relate to improvements to the public right of way. Made it clear, what the spacing of trees should be, what their setbacks should be, how the sidewalk dimensions should be, other features and all. Again, we got to have all that stuff clear so that if there's a project that qualifies for ministerial approval, there's a path that it can follow. Next. Buildings, really paying probably giving a lot of attention to the way that buildings face streets, because this is where you can really kind of hurt that sense of community, or it can really encourage it. And so paying attention to the frequency of entrances on the ground floor, transparency, which would be the amount of window that you've got on the ground floor, the rhythm of bays, and then on the upper stories also wanting to have windows so that you have a sense of, you know, eyes on the street, or call it kind of informal surveillance, helps to deter unwanted behavior. Next. So here you see that illustrated, very simple illustration. And buildings are required to come up to the street, come up within 10 or 15 feet of the street. And what does that mean? That means that parking lots would go to the side or behind the buildings, and where they go to the side, you wouldn't be able to do it across the whole frontage. That you'd always have at least 65% of the street lined by a building. Again, as a way to activate and to make this the pedestrian experience more safe and interesting. Next. And so these couple examples of, you know, giving more attention, the most attention to the ground floor as far as the facade goes, because that's at eye level. That's where the activity is. That's the point at which a building and the public realm, the side connect. Next. Exterior finishes, using what was already adopted, just with a little bit of cleanup, striking prescriptive standards as that kind of complicates the approval process. Next. And then site features, walls, you can get into any of these things when there's questions. And next. Performance standards. Okay, so this is another category of standards and noise. Okay, so the noise standard, we want to avoid being duplicative of existing standards. We especially want to avoid being duplicative when the other standards really are superior to anything that we could try to craft ourselves. So noise refers to the county standards. Stormwater management refers to the county stormwater program, which is extremely detailed, and, you know, biologists and civil engineers have done their due diligence to figure everything out. Similarly with transportation, it refers to the county's TDM program. You know, why reinvent the wheel when there's something that really works well? So just referring to it. The EIR may identify some mitigations, so there's some general language there to make sure that those get captured as requirements. Lighting and trash debris, those two are actually written into the draft and fairly straightforward. Next. Parking. So we looked at parking, and one thing to note to preface the whole thing is that there's a relatively recent state law that really is a game changer, and that's the AB 2097, which eliminates minimum parking requirements within a half mile of a major transit line, which is interpreted to be a major transit stop. And so what you see here is that half mile radius from transit stops, major transit stops. And the light green is one where determination needs to be made. It's unclear. It's the location of a rail line station that might go across the Dumbarton Bridge or thereabouts, and would connect Redwood City with the East Bay, and would have a station here. And you know, it's a whole nother conversation as to whether that's a real project or not. Next. We were very fortunate to have W-Trans on the team, and in addition to doing the EIR work, they also helped to tune up the parking standards. And so, where they are applied, getting things to fit what their experience is in similar types of locations. And going with just one standard for all the mixed use districts. Next. Okay, so we can come back to those if you like. And then in terms of the electric vehicle charging stations, here's another instance where we could have written in a standard, but really don't need to. This state law actually requires electric vehicle charging stations, and the standards at the state level are changing and getting better and better all the time. So might be indicative of that. Next. Community plan amendments, they're not called out here, but again, the purpose really is for consistency with the zoning and state law to improve clarity, facilitate implementation. I think the one noteworthy change is that the community benefits language predated density bonus, particularly at the county level. And there are other provisions too that just are moot now, are duplicative, and also confuse things in light of this rezone. Next steps, here we are, 23rd. We expect the draft EIR to be published by the April 18th, maybe a few days sooner. You have an opportunity, if you'd like to carry this over, for another visit and discussion on April 27th. And then in May, we'll be moving to the Planning Commission. Those would be the public hearings. And those meetings also would occur while the draft EIR comment period is occurring. And so that's an important opportunity, and everyone should note that the draft EIR comes out and then you can read it. And if you take issue with any of the analysis, you're invited to comment. And then that period closes, and then there's a response to all those comments in the form of the final EIR. And that then gets carried to the Board of Supervisors for their review, and after the EIR is certified, adoption. Great.
And so just to jump in and kind of wrap around some of the things Matt has said, I think a couple important things to recall is that the Technical Advisory Committee, made up of several members of the North Fair Oaks Community Council and other stakeholders of the community, have had a thorough review process for this and have signed off on the version that you see before you. Again, in the current mixed use zones that you see in North Fair Oaks, we're not proposing changes to the intensity of land uses, to height, to density, to how many units you can build. Those are remaining the same. We're just trying to align them both with new changes to state law, which have taken some of our discretion out of how we review projects and what standards we can apply to them. So it gets very confusing when we have to look at the state law and our standards are different, and we have to align them for every project. So there's a lot of cleanup that's happening just for that purpose. And as well, we've found some things that were just inconsistent or hard to apply, and we're cleaning those up. The major changes really are the extension of those mixed use zoning districts to a few smaller areas that are adjacent to El Camino Real and Middlefield. The attempt to really streamline and make objective the design standards, because again, state law is increasingly taking our ability to apply subjective standards away. So we've tried to take the design elements that make buildings look good in North Fair Oaks and that come from the community plan and the existing zoning, and reach the same intent, but make them objectively applicable. So they're a yes or a no without our exercise of subjective judgment. And then I would say the other changes in the areas that are not now heavily commercially ground floor, we are proposing allowing residential uses by right for the whole building. Currently, you can build a mix of commercial and residential by right, but if you wanted to use the sites for all one use, be it office, be it commercial, be it residential, you would need a use permit. And we're proposing changing that so that residential alone won't need a use permit, but again, not in the areas that have the most commercial ground floor uses. And as Matt pointed out, we don't anticipate this change having a significant displacing effect on local businesses from the analysis that we've done. So with that, and I would also echo what Matt said. We have not asked you for a formal resolution or recommendation to the Planning Commission, which would be the next step. Although I think you have it's at your discretion if you wanted to make one tonight. But I do know some of the members probably haven't had much of a crack at this. The EIR hasn't been released. So if the council prefers, we can come back in April and we would be asking for a formal recommendation at that point. And with that, that closes our presentation.
Are there any questions from council members for either Matt or Will?
Question.
Please go ahead, George.
Will, Matt, thank you for presenting. It was very informative. I've got a question about setbacks. Considering the limited space that we have on the lots between Middlefield and Third through Pitt that are being rezoned, having the setbacks at 10 feet on ground level and 20 feet as we move up, that seems very restrictive to be able to develop anything of substance, anything that wouldn't make the land use feasible. Could there be any amendments to this at all, or is this a hard set?
I would say, I think you're probably the first person who's suggested lesser setbacks rather than greater. It's a pretty standard 10 feet in the rear and with no front setback does tend to allow quite a bit of the use of the parcel. But Matt, if you wanted to weigh in on that as well.
Sure. You really need 30 feet of separation between a rear building and another rear building for privacy, unless there's some offsets, which are difficult to control. So it's very slightly, but there may also not be reason to do that. Most of your parcels are over 100 feet deep. Once you subtract 20 feet, you're at 80 feet. And a typical typical apartment building is about 65, 75 feet. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there.
Yeah, I would say, that most of the consensus and most of the guidance we've had has been around basically landing right here at that setback. We could take a little bit more of a look at it, but I would also say there are always exception processes where the developer can ask for a lesser setback, or if they are providing a significant amount of affordable housing, the state requires us to give exemptions. And so in either case, there would be flexibility beyond what the strict standard is, but it would be on a case-by-case basis.
Also, balconies are allowed to project 5 feet into the setback. So that puts the edge of the balcony 15 feet from the property line. And then if you had a building adjacent and that was 15 feet, then you'd really be up to the minimum you'd want for privacy.
And we have to be clear, streamlined and actually reduce the setbacks across the board. They were greater before the zoning amendments came, before the amendments that we're proposing now.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from council? Kathleen, please.
Thank you, Will and Matt, for your presentation. It's hard not to, it's hard to get my head around the fact that this will disrupt Montero in a huge way. And I'm not sure that that's what we're talking about tonight, but in terms of if we agree to the change in zoning, that means, do we get any more feedback? We get to talk to more people about what then the developer would come along and do. Or once it's rezoned, it's rezoned, and a developer can come in and do whatever they want. And it might not fit with all of North Fair Oaks. I've driven around it, I've actually looked at a bunch of addresses, drove around, looked at the places that are going to be displaced, and I just feel like we don't have. Maybe then this might not be the time for it, but are we gonna put anything into a plan that is going to help the displacement? There's a ton of small businesses that have suffered for years now. And so now all of a sudden redevelopment's gonna come along, bulldoze down buildings. I'm trying to get my arms around something that it might not be tonight, but do we get a shot at deciding what the developer gets to do if we change the zoning?
Yeah, I think I would say there's a couple answers to this question. I think that's a very well expressed concern. I think the county has that concern as well. I think we're in a little bit for the areas that are already zoned as mixed use, where we're not changing the heights or the intensities. We're essentially stuck. We cannot downzone them. We can't, state law no longer allows us to reduce those densities once we've zoned them. So we are basically stuck with those, and we have very little flexibility to ask for community benefits from the developers as well. The state has kind of tied our hands on that. I would say, and the extension areas are fairly small. We think they're appropriate areas for some higher intensity development, but I think the county has an ongoing conversation, and I think the council would be an appropriate place to carry that forward as well, in regards to how do we address the secondary impacts of the development that, I think we all see is coming. We all see the state wants us to facilitate. We are increasingly unable to reject, even if we wanted to. What do we do to help either residents or businesses that are displaced? And I think that would be a separate set of programs that would be outside this consideration, but it's not something that the county is averse to or not interested in speaking to, nor do I think it's inappropriate for the council to have a role in that.
Just as a point, well, I'd like to, at some point in the near future, get somebody on one of our agendas to discuss tenant protections, not only for residents, but also for businesses. And to your point, I know it's something that the board is concerned about and looking at, but I'd like to get a status of where that is now, what's possible, and what advice we could offer to board of supervisors to mitigate disruption. To Kathleen's point, it's going to happen. And I think it's my impression that the protections that are there right now are inadequate, particularly for residential. So, but it's know that the board's looking at it, the county's concerned about it.
I think we can connect those dots and come back with that.
Are there any other questions from council members? Go ahead. Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I did have a question on some of the design guidelines and whatnot. Is there anything in there for green space or, again, environmental considerations for drainage or, reusing environmental tree? I saw something about street trees. Otherwise also using kind of maybe green power, adding in some things to help the development or zoning for that.
So we do. So there is, as you see, there's a requirement for tree planting. And then the developments all have to meet both our green building standards and the state standards. And so they have to be electric ready or fully electrified. In many cases, they may have to have solar. There are a variety. They have to have electric chargers for the cars. And not only some spaces already electrified, but then electric ready for other spaces. And then there are a lot of stormwater treatment requirements that we impose that mitigate the impacts of the development on stormwater, on water quality. So I think we feel that not just in the zoning itself, but in the totality of the county's regulations and the way we apply the state regulations, we think that is pretty sufficiently addressed.
Okay, thank you.
And I also note that where there's building setbacks along a street, any area that's not sidewalk or associated with utilities or outdoor dining, for instance, would have to be landscaped.
So you have a question?
I do. You mentioned about possibly next month getting the EIR plan. Could that be done by next month?
Correct. So this project requires an environmental impact report, which says what is the environmental, a whole range of possible impacts on the environment, including housing displacement, including, broadly defined what the environment is. We have a draft of it, which is we are preparing for public release, and it'll be released to the public and to other stakeholders, other agencies and departments. And then there will be a comment period. We will take in all the comments on the EIR and revise it, report out on the comments. So you should see that, and we'll send out notifications. The council will receive notifications of that. We are preparing it for publication now, so we don't know exactly when it will be published, but Matt targeted, I think April 18th is the intended date, so it should be around that time.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments from council members, council vice chairman? Oh, I thought you were raising your. Okay.
There was something about narrowing of the sidewalks or the sidewalks being a little narrow. How does that affect what's going on in Middlefield right now?
So we're not proposing narrowing the sidewalks. We're proposing that new developments be required to provide public sidewalk as part of the development. So in areas where there's not sidewalk, they would be required. In areas where the county has already created sidewalks, it won't affect that at all. They'll have to basically maintain what is being provided through the redevelopment of the streetscape.
If there's an especially narrow sidewalk, some sidewalk might be required on the property.
Correct. Yeah. So if the actual sidewalk in the right of way is too small, we do require them to provide an additional part of sidewalk on their own property to make it wide enough to meet ADA standards, to meet accessibility, to make it really a kind of passable sidewalk that is appropriate to the community.
Also planting street trees.
One question I had, I noticed, we have the standards for bicycle parking. Will that also allow a lot of the scooter parking or other mobility devices that people use, connected devices, or is it only for bicycles?
We're only requiring bicycle parking because that's a fairly standard kind of mobility, multimodal transit requirement. We did not require any of the other kind of scooter or e-bike parking. It would be allowed, but they would have to go through the process of permitting it. It tends to have different infrastructure required and different impacts. So there's electrical, obviously, that's required for those, typically a station that you check them in and check them out. So it's a little bit different. So we certainly didn't require them for every project, but they're not precluded either.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just to clarify, would the required bicycle parking only accommodate bicycles, or could scooters be also parked in those spots?
If they propose, I think we would contemplate allowing it if they proposed a facility that was multi-use that could accommodate bicycles and scooters. We would certainly consider that. Yeah, I don't think anything is prohibiting that.
Yeah, I guess the context is with a lot of scooters now being used, they get wherever they can be. So if there's a designated spot, it would help consolidate that and prevent accidents or other things.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have to say, I confess, we did not think of that. And it's well put, because that is an increasingly common thing. So actually we can take that, we'll loop back and take that into consideration. And maybe that we could say bikes are required, but we encourage this, or there are ways that we can plug that into the zoning still.
Thank you.
One more question.
If the train, the tracks to nowhere, if that never happens, is it possible that parking would be allowed in that area?
If the train, so the question about the train station, so I think where this comes from is the new state law that says we are not allowed to require parking around this potential train station, and we're not sure whether the law actually applies to that station, which is a theoretical future station. It's identified in a regional transportation plan. And we think that may mean that we can't impose parking requirements there, but we're not sure. So it's not contingent on if the train happens or not. It's contingent on we need to figure out whether the law really applies there or not. And we've had a hard time kind of figuring that out. So along El Camino Real, we know within about a half mile of El Camino Real, we're really not allowed to impose parking standards for new multifamily projects. That train station is a little bit more ambiguous.
Thank you.
Other questions from council members? Do we have any public comment?
During this time, members of the public, if you wish to comment on agenda item number 4, North Fair Oaks rezoning and general plan amendments, please bring a speaker's slip up to the clerk during this time. You will be granted 2 minutes to speak when your name is called. Last call for public comment. There are no public comments at this time. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Will, and Matt, for your presentation. I assume we'll have you back next month.
Yes, we intend to come April 27th, yeah,
27.
or whenever it may be. I'm not entirely sure. Thank you all. Thank you very much
An idea towards a recommendation to the planning commission meeting.
at that meeting. Yes.
Adoption. So. Okay, very good. Like to take an item out of order. I would like to go back to item 3 and offer the opportunity for a couple of members of the public who arrived late this evening to offer public comment on the subdivision on 6th Avenue. I understand we have members of the public who would like to comment on that, and I would like to. So have members of the public interested in that comment, please.
Sure. I would like to remind council members and presenters that we do have an interpreter, and to speak a little slower when you speak, that way interpreter catches up.
Buenas noches, yo quería decir que pues hay una que van a hacer el edificio en el 413, que pues no hay parqueaderos y dicen que van a hacer ahí como 12 edificios. Quería yo saber que se pueda hacer. Eso es todo.
Good evening, everybody. I wanted to ask you about parking for the building 413. Actually 12 buildings, and I wanted to know if there's anything can be done about parking. That's all. That's all my question.
Thank you. Agenda item number 5, the Housing Leadership Council perspective on the housing and county housing element. We have 35 minutes for this presentation. I had Jeremy Levine on the agenda as giving the presentation. Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Brooks, and thank you to the entire Community Council for having me tonight. Would you mind letting in my co-presenter, Kalisha Webster from Housing Choices?
Need to promote Kalisha to a panelist.
She'll actually be starting the presentation, but while that's getting set up and Kalisha is being let in, I can say we really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. We've been involved in county, focusing on the county housing element since November of last year, and really appreciate this opportunity to talk to the North Fair Oaks Community Council about what we've learned and where we see the housing element going. Just a brief introduction to myself. I'm Jeremy Levine, the policy manager for the Housing Leadership Council. I'm one of the co-leads of a coalition of organizations that have been focusing on the county housing element. And I'll pass the mic over to Kalisha to get things going.
Thanks, Jeremy, and good evening. Oops. Uh-oh, my computer is jumping. Sorry about that, guys. So good evening, Chair Esser and council members. My name is Kalisha Webster, and I'm the Senior Housing Advocate at Housing Choices, a nonprofit dedicated to helping people with developmental and other disabilities in San Mateo County find and retain affordable housing. And we're here to talk tonight, as Jeremy mentioned, about the county's housing element and how all of us can work together to bring more equity to the future drafts. So who are we? Jeremy and I, along with Jordan Grimes of Greenbelt Alliance, who was unable to join us tonight due to some scheduling conflicts, are co-leads of a cross-county coalition of over 25 individuals, including representatives of local community-based organizations and unincorporated county residents interested in supporting the county in developing an equitable and pro-housing plan, also known as the housing element. On this slide, you can see some of the different organizations that are partnering with us in this work, span a range of interests, including people with disabilities, farm workers, families with children, and local housing advocacy organizations. Our goal is to bring as many voices to the table as possible to make sure we have a housing plan that meets the needs of everyone in our community, especially those who are most vulnerable and have the greatest needs. While the housing element update is a requirement for every jurisdiction, our coalition was formed because we see the county's housing plans as having the greatest effect on what happens not only in unincorporated county, but throughout incorporated jurisdictions as well. This is because the county controls many of the resources that other jurisdictions need to not only create more housing, but to affirmatively further fair housing for special needs groups with the greatest housing needs and are most vulnerable to falling into homelessness or being displaced from the communities they've been a part of their entire lives. While each city within San Mateo County has the power to make land use decisions that control the fate of affordable housing projects, their small size limits their ability to generate local housing funds to finance projects. This means that San Mateo County's Affordable Housing Fund, funded by Measure K, as well as others, several state programs and administered by the County Board of Supervisors and Department of Housing, plays a key role in contributing local funds that make projects financially feasible. The priorities set within the funding guidelines of the Affordable Housing Fund, along with San Mateo County's Vision Zero goal to attain functional zero for homelessness, meaning ending chronic homelessness in the county so that homelessness is rare and brief, aligns with our coalition's own goals of supporting the hardest to serve residents in the county. And by developing a housing element that includes pro-housing programs and policies that is in compliance with state law, the county will be eligible for additional funding so that we can be even more effective in tackling these challenges and supporting all of our neighbors, regardless of income, ability, race, or ethnicity. In addition to these important financial incentives for getting the county's housing element right, we also chose to focus on the county because they have more affordable housing projects than any of the incorporated cities, further demonstrating that they are on the right track and are serious about tackling our homeless and housing crisis and just need the local knowledge that our coalition can bring to create meaningful change in the county. We believe that this is especially relevant to all of you here in North Fair Oaks as one of several unincorporated communities. More funding and resources for the county will undoubtedly mean more funding and resources for your community to implement the changes and priorities you have all set. Next, I'll be turning it over to Jeremy, who'll talk a little more about some of our concerns with the current draft housing element and opportunities for improvement, as well as outlining what our coalition has achieved so far.
Thank you. Yeah, an extension of some of the things Kalisha was talking about, there are a lot of opportunities in the housing element. Historically, housing elements, they've been around since the end of the 60s. They were useful planning documents, but they were largely voluntary and there were a lot less requirements. They were much narrower in scope. And in the past 5 years, housing elements have changed into these really comprehensive planning documents that can help jurisdictions look ahead for the next 8 years and think about how they're going to meet the comprehensive housing needs of their community. So We think that this provides an opportunity to go beyond the normal Measure K planning process and think about Measure K for a longer period and how the county can use its financial resources to support housing. We're also thinking about how the county can pursue rezoning, not just in the areas where it already has multifamily housing, but in some of the highest opportunity areas that have historically not allowed multifamily housing, and as a result, not had the same kind of access, not led on housing in the same way as North Fair Oaks. County, because of the county's unique demographics and the geography of the county, there are unique groups like farm workers in the county that we have an opportunity as a coalition to provide support for that just normally don't get the attention of a lot of groups in incorporated cities or Bayside in general. As Kalisha was talking about, just in terms of opportunities, the county wants to solve homelessness. They are financially incentivized to solve homelessness. They have have led consistently on solving homelessness in the county and have kind of pulled the cities along sometimes. And so, the county's housing element presents the best opportunity to work with a jurisdiction that really has the right incentives to face the problems that we have. And then the county, as Kalisha was mentioning, if it does a really good housing element, can get this pro-housing designation status, which is essentially a pathway to get extra resources for the state to plan for affordable housing and to get resources for infrastructure to accommodate the growth as it comes. So we think that the county deserves deserves that funding, and we want to make sure they have a really great housing plan that qualifies for that funding. Next slide, please. Next, thank you. Next, yeah, perfect. So we've, as I've mentioned, been around since November, so we're pretty new. We've done a lot in the past 5 months, though, I would say. We've managed to meet with the staffers for all of the supervisors, as well as some of the supervisors themselves, and just gotten a sense of where they're at, what their kind of goals are. We've also been talking a lot with the county planning staff, and I'm going to get to it, but they have been really excellent partners in the, kind of really quick turnaround time that the housing element has required. We've sent 2 different comment letters. One public comment letter with a set of policy recommendations, which we're going to outline to you today, and then one comment letter with a petition that we had been circulating, which all those logos that you had seen earlier were from that petition letter. And circulating that petition letter basically was in support of the proposals we'd made. We got 300 signatures for that. And then our coalition in the 5 months that we've been around has grown very quickly from a core group of me and Kalisha, Housing Leadership Council, Housing Choices, and Greenbelt Alliance, to more than 20 organizations around the county, working together, trying to make sure that the county has a great housing plan and gets the resources it needs to move forward on housing. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, the county housing element started in a good place and has continued to make progress. We've achieved some things. Early on, especially, staff worked with us. They had a long list of sites where they said housing was going to get built, and some of those sites have that were not as realistic have been removed, and they've been really working as good partners to look at what is actually feasible for affordable housing. And the county has also recently, this is in the past month, really indicated that it plans to dedicate a lot of resources to support the affordable housing needs that the housing element identified to some extent. The county just made a one-time $10 million allocation to support farm worker housing from the Measure K funds, and then they made a commitment to increase the annual allocation to a housing voucher program by another $4 million, which will help address the zero functional homelessness goals that the county has. Beyond putting money into affordable housing and special needs housing, the county is doing some rezonings outside of North Fair Oaks. it has expanded the area where it's considering affordable housing. And you can see, you know, there's not a ton of unincorporated land on the bay side that they can go to, but where they can in Colma and Harbor Industrial Area, which is like Belmont, and Broadmoor, which is Daly City-ish, those areas are going to be rezoned for 89 dwelling units per acre or more. You know, it's not it's a real rezoning in a narrow area. And then the county also is pursuing some policies to promote housing for people with disabilities, specifically by encouraging or requiring visibility standards for some units and projects that get money from the county's Affordable Housing Fund. Did I summarize that correctly, Kalisha? All right, sweet. So these are big commitments in the housing element, you know, real funding, real policy changes. There are some areas to improve, though. We can look at the next slide. Some of these are a little outdated, but the fact is that the county is planning for the overwhelming majority of housing in North Fair Oaks. And there's some justification behind that. North Fair Oaks is the largest like urban community that's unincorporated in the county. But we think that there is opportunity to pursue more rezonings outside of North Fair Oaks. The rezonings that there are pretty limited. The county does have limited land, but there is more land available. And not all of the sites that the county has are as realistic as they could be. They've gotten to a pretty good list, but there are still some constraints the county could address. But to their credit, this is like part of what the North Fair Oaks rezonings is supposed to be addressing, and part of what the other rezonings are supposed to address. So it's not pure black and white. It's just we think that the county could make some policy changes to make it unambiguous that their sites are going to develop. The few plans for farm worker housing line is, I would say that's actually just not really true anymore. There's a $10 million plan for farm worker housing. And so that's, the county really has demonstrated that the area to improve there would be putting information in the housing element about the work the county is doing, because the housing element doesn't currently take credit for that, which is something I know staff are already working on. And then there are ways that, again, the statement, no plan, few plans for special needs housing. The county has a great plan for, you know, increasing some access, some accessible units, increasing units that are accessible for people with disabilities. They have a plan to invest in farm worker housing. There isn't a comprehensive plan to move forward on increasing the overall supply of deeply affordable units, which is really core to a lot of the fundamental special housing needs. And so we think that they can do more to work on that. And at least as of now, the current draft, which I think is going to change a lot in the next few months, but right now, the draft doesn't have a lot of new policies and programs, and even with the changes that the county can take credit for based on things they're already doing, like the investment in coastside housing, there's still room to add more policies and programs that will make sure that the county is removing constraints that make sites possible to develop, and protecting tenants and promoting fair housing as it moves forward. So I want to talk a little bit about what we still want and what that looks like in order to address these issues. There are really 4 areas of policy that we're still looking at. We're looking at development standards, tenant protections. It was great to hear Chair Esser bring tenant protections up, because it's one of the big issues on our radar. We're still looking at financing and what kind of commitments the county can make. And then we're looking at a range of special housing needs, which are mandated in housing element law to be considered and addressed. Next slide. We're going to run through all 4 of these policy issues while just so that you can kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. So just to be clear, in our previous letters and now, we have not taken a stance on North Fair Oaks rezonings. We are trying to take the cue from local community groups in unincorporated county, and the North Fair Oaks Community Council has been undergoing this complex and complicated rezoning, and we frankly felt that we did not have the information that we would need in order to take an informed stance that would be helpful for the community. But what we did take a stance on is that North Fair Oaks is clearly leading the county on affordable housing, and we want other parts of the county to be a part of that moving forward. And as we noted, the county has proposed some rezonings, but we think they can extend those plans to cover the entirety of the harbor industrial area. Right now, they only cover part of this industrial area, which is like right next to transit. It's in like the middle of Belmont. It's a really good area for housing. We think they could look at rezoning some more controversial places that are not already under consideration, like the Peninsula Golf and Country Club, which may not turn into housing anytime soon, but would be it's a big site on a major road, could have a lot of opportunity. And then there are areas of the county that have historically been higher income and are proximate to higher income neighborhoods like West Menlo Park and unincorporated Atherton. And we think that the county should pursue at least some kind of medium density rezonings that increases the kinds of housing choice that can exist in those neighborhoods, so that the entire county, every district, is contributing to the county's needs in at least some way. Our goal is not to make every part of the county homogenous. We realize, North Fair Oaks has its unique geographic situation and opportunities to pursue the kinds of standards that you're pursuing, but we think that every part of the county can contribute beyond what they're doing now to meet the housing need. Next, that's the big principle guiding it. We think that it's really important that as the county encourages this new development, residents are not displaced, that the changes that occur are benefiting the communities that they occur within. And one of the ways to make sure that new development benefits communities is to have some tenant protections in place. And the tenant protections that we've been really focused on and think right now have the most opportunity to provide that kind of placemaking, that keeping people in place even as change occurs, is looking at just cause for eviction. And I'll talk about the rental registry at the end, but just cause for eviction is what we've been really focused on, and what we know some of the supervisors seem to be at least a little bit focused on. And the scope, just cause is a big range of things. In 2018, there was some state legislation that implemented a set of just cause for eviction protections that essentially make it more difficult to evict a tenant without a specific reason that they need to be evicted. But we're focusing on 3 protections out of the several that one could choose from. We think that the county could extend just cause to tenants from their first day of tenancy. Right now, state law only extends just cause protections after 1 year of residency. And the fact is that eviction is destabilizing to tenants no matter how long they've lived in a building. Whether they've lived there for a day or a month or a year, it's destabilizing to be evicted. And so we should limit faultless evictions when we can. Increased relocation payouts is another strategy that right now state law requires when no fault evictions occur, there must be a 1-month relocation payout, which makes it so that the tenant can afford the next down payment, can afford some of the moving costs. But 1 month rarely covers all of those costs. And it means that tenants, when they're evicted with no fault, can sometimes have to bear really high costs of moving, which for a lot of people can be pretty disruptive. And so increasing the amount of relocation payouts still, it doesn't interfere with a landlord's ability to manage their property, but it ensures that tenants are not, completely disrupted when evictions occur that they're not at fault for. And then a final protection that we've been talking about is just a loophole that occurs in the state law. It's just a pure wraparound where in some cases, property owners can say that they intend to renovate their property, and that's a just cause to evict tenants if you are renovating your property. But then landlords will evict all their tenants and not renovate their property because they're not actually required to have documentation in order to demonstrate that they have a real plan to renovate. And so they do the eviction, increase rent, do not renovate, and then, you know, continue renting. And so that's just a pure loophole that cities can close and has been closed in cities like Richmond, East Palo Alto. So they're precedent for all of these policies. And there are a different coalition of organizations, the San Mateo Anti-Displacement Coalition, sent a letter with a longer list of proposals to the county. We are focusing on just these three, but if you want to look at a full scope of what a just cause for eviction ordinance can be, then that's another discussion. And then last slide for me, financing.
Did you want to talk about the rental registry?
Yes, okay, yeah. One other tenant protection that we've discussed, which would be a bigger lift for the county and is kind of more of an aspirational goal, would be a rental registry. And for the most part, we want the county to make firm commitments to actually implement policy changes, but a rental registry is an experimental policy that would have a pretty big administrative burden for the county potentially. And so we're interested in the county exploring what a rental registry would look like. And the purpose of a rental registry, which would basically be a registry of rentals and evictions and what's happening with those prices, would be to get a better sense, like really just data of what is actually happening on the rental market. It's amazing how little we know about the experiences tenants are actually having. And so rental registry would be a helpful first step to knowing what we need to do in order to support tenants and prevent further displacement as it's occurring. So it's really just an information gathering tool, not a significant imposition, but it would, at this point in time, we think it's probably more productive that the county start to explore this option rather than making a commitment that they can't keep to implement it. So it's more exploratory there. Last item that I am going to talk about, we're really interested in the county making a commitment in its housing element in some way to increase the financing for affordable homes. And HLC, the Housing Leadership Council, recently released a report that had studied Measure K, and it looked at how Measure K has been used to support affordable housing over the last 10 years, what it has delivered, the successes, the areas to improve. The fact is, there are a lot of successes. It's been a really impactful financing tool, and the funding that has gone to affordable housing has made the county able to invest in a lot of new projects. At the same time, the report found that there are real slowdowns in the county pipeline, like affordable housing developments taking a lot longer than they otherwise could. And there are missed opportunities to develop affordable housing. There are developments that go underfunded and ultimately fail. And by increasing the Measure K allocation by approximately $10 million, the allocation that goes into the county's affordable housing fund to invest in producing these affordable homes, the county could speed up its pipeline and invest in more units. And this $10 million is kind of a Goldilocks number. Too much more than that, and there would be money sitting around because the nonprofit development community wouldn't be able to absorb it. Too much less, and the county's missing opportunities to really speed up its pipeline and build more affordable housing. So the issues with Measure K financing and this proposal is that the county cannot predict the future. They do not know what receipts from Measure K are going to be. They're variable. And so, you know, the county can't say 2 years from now, we're gonna invest $10 million extra in affordable housing. They don't know how much money they're going to have from Measure K, and they don't know what the other programmatic plans are going to be. And so what we're looking for at this point is more of a conditional commitment, that the county pursue a conditional commitment saying that they are going to maintain or ideally increase the proportion of Measure K spending that goes to affordable housing, rather than trying to go for some fixed number that's not achievable. We should go for at least a fixed or increasing quantity of the total pot, recognizing that we can't, demand a fixed number when there are limited resources like this. So that's the kind of evolving policy ask based on just the realities of county financing and planning. Fact is, the county is in their most recent allocating of Measure K for their 2-year plan. They have invested a lot of money in affordable housing and clearly are committed to moving in that direction. So we think there's even further room for them to improve by making stronger commitments in the housing element. But beyond Measure K, there are other strategies the county can use to pursue financing. And one of them would be increasing the county's affordable housing impact fee, which I believe is already described in the housing element as something that the county will participate in a nexus study to potentially pursue. So that's the first step. The county's making a lot of progress there. Another mechanism would be a vacancy tax, which is an increasingly common measure. It doesn't raise a ton of money. It raises some money and it tends to bring some units online, but it's not a panacea to ending the housing crisis, because the fact is that the vacancy rate is not that high. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Galicia and let her wrap things up with the last area of policy and some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I'll be talking about the special housing needs analysis and requirements to plan for people with special housing needs. So state law requires that every jurisdiction include a special housing needs analysis, which discusses not only potential housing problems faced by each special needs group, but also requires a description of any existing resources or programs, an assessment of unmet needs, as well as identification of potential program or policy options and resources to address those needs. The goal of the special needs analysis is to identify groups that have the most serious housing needs in order to develop and prioritize responsive programs in its housing plan. Special needs are those associated with specific demographic or occupational groups that call for specific programs, responses such as the development of units with larger bedroom counts for large families, or accessibility needs of people with disabilities. State law specifically requires the analysis of the special housing needs of people who are elderly or disabled, including developmental disabilities, female-headed households, large families, farm workers, and people experiencing homelessness. These special needs groups often spend a disproportionate amount of their income to secure safe and decent housing, and are sometimes subject to discrimination based on their specific needs or circumstances. In addition to the required groups, the state also provides guidance to jurisdictions to include any other groups the locality deems appropriate based on local knowledge. Some of the recommended programs and policies that we have outlined in our comments to the county on its housing element is incentivizing extremely low income housing production, which is needed by most special needs populations. The county does already incentivize housing production of extremely low income units through its affordable housing fund, which requires eligible projects to set aside 5% of units for the unhoused and an additional 15% of units for extremely low income households. However, even with these policies in place, we do believe that additional incentives are needed to develop the 400 additional extremely low income units needed just in unincorporated San Mateo County, so not including the incorporated county over the next 8 years. The amendments could include a local density bonus program, fee waivers, revision of the county's residential parking standards, or other areas to lower costs or increase funding for extremely low income housing. Strengthening the county's commitment to adopt a universal design ordinance, requiring all new construction projects to be accessible or adaptable for people with disabilities. While the county is committed to adding the visibility standards requirement to the Affordable Housing Fund guidelines, this limits the requirement only to projects that receive these funds, meaning market rate, commercial, and affordable housing not receiving this funding source will still be allowed to create projects that are not accessible to people with all abilities. While the county has committed to studying a universal design ordinance in the future, We want to see stronger commitments to creating a community that is accessible and inclusive of all residents. Studying the effects of the Housing Authority's tiered subsidy table, which is unique to San Mateo County, on the lowest income earners, such as seniors and people with disabilities on fixed incomes, who due to this unique algorithm, even with a Section 8 voucher, a program designed to increase housing mobility and choice, face greater challenges in finding housing that is affordable to them and located outside of segregated high poverty neighborhoods. And address the housing needs of farm workers by implementing policy recommendations outlined in the county's 2016 agricultural workforce housing needs assessment. So as Jeremy talked about earlier, they do have some new funding coming through. So a one-time $10 million payment and then additional funding for they're applying for from the state for housing for agricultural workers. But we see that there needs to be something additional programs could be recommended as well. So some of the recommendations from the housing needs assessment are a local source of funding for developing affordable housing, not dependent on federal funding, so that it is open to people regardless of immigration status. Expansion of the farm labor housing loan program, including rehab and replacement of the current housing stock, as well as new housing projects. Educating landowners and agricultural producers about the various types of technical and financial federal, state, and local assistance available to develop, improve, or expand on-site farm labor housing, and development of a model residential lease agreement for landlords to use, and educate both landlords and tenants about federal regulations applicable to employer-provided housing to address concerns that few agricultural workers are offered written leases. So what is the current timeline for the housing element, and what opportunities still exist to engage further? As you all may have heard, the state required all Bay Area counties to submit their adopted housing elements by January 31 to be in compliance with state law. Unfortunately, the county was late getting in their first draft, which was not submitted until January 20th, and is subject to a 90-day review period before the county can adopt. This means that we are already almost 3 months behind schedule for compliance with state law, which opened up the county to some possible repercussions. You may have heard the term builder's remedy recently, which means that because the county's housing element is out of compliance, a developer could come in and propose a project that in no way fits with local zoning and general plan requirements, and the county would be extremely limited in its ability to deny the project as long as at least 20% of the units are affordable. So the sooner the county gets back into compliance, the sooner they'll be protected from the builder's remedy. And based on a submission date of January 20th, we expect the county will receive a letter from the state determining if the county's draft housing element has been determined to be in compliance around April 20th. After which we expect there to be additional hearings with the Board of Supervisors to review the state's comments, as well as revisions made to the current draft. This puts us close to a secondary deadline, May 31, after which this county would be at risk of losing access to some state funding and resources, as well as stricter zoning requirements, rezoning requirements, and possible fines. And lastly, what are we looking for from you all tonight? So in order to avoid these consequences and get a better housing element, we're asking for all of your help and recommending to the county supervisors that they consider our campaign proposals. Request a housing element study session as soon as possible to start revision to the housing element to achieve state compliance by or before May 31st. Educate other members of the North Fair Oaks community about current housing element policies, as well as opportunities for improvement, and urge Supervisor Slocum to be proactive in addressing the concerns of the community by asking the staff to put more good policies and programs in the housing element, which will affirmatively further fair housing for all members of the unincorporated county, and work with other supervisors to get their support for these policies and programs. And we thank you for giving us time to speak tonight. If you guys want to follow up, here is the contact information for me and Jeremy.
Thank you both very much for your presentation at this time. Are there any questions from council members? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I did have a question about your rental registry. Is there anything preventing your organization from setting up a private or something that's, you know, funded by your group in order to at least start collecting data rather than just waiting around for the county, understanding that's a big lift and there's a lot of resources that may not be available for a while?
Yeah, there are different legal aid groups that have their own data on this, but it's really patchy. It's just hard as a private organization to get like really good data because most landlords won't report it unless there's some rule that they have to.
No, after you.
No, go ahead.
You mentioned we currently have a 30-day, 1-month relocation payout when a tenant leaves, and you wanted to increase that even further. Are you worried that by increasing it at all anymore, that this would actually increase rents, considering they're already high, thus exacerbating the current problem that we have?
So it's a statewide provision that it's not whenever a tenant leaves, it's when there's a no fault eviction. Like the tenant was just there in their house and they weren't doing anything wrong and they get evicted. I think that there's always a give and take with these regulations. Like you're putting a burden on a landlord, and like that always has the risk to raise costs. I think of all the just cause for eviction protections, relocation payouts has the lowest impact on raising costs because it still gives landlords a really predictable like schedule, basically. Like they can still do what they want generally. And it's not for most evictions, it's for no fault evictions. So, and it's not just when a tenant leaves, it's when they're getting pushed out.
Yeah, and like Jeremy was saying, this is not something that would apply to every person that moves out of their housing. This would be in very specific circumstances.
Yeah.
And so, in the situation where someone's being forced out of their home and they've done nothing wrong, we want to make sure that we're not putting them into a situation where they become destabilized again. So we want to make sure that we are protecting renters who may be in a situation where maybe they're in a naturally occurring affordable housing and there's nothing like that's available to them. We want to make sure that they have the resources they need to become stable somewhere else. And it's also one of the side effects could be that it discourages landlords from kind of erroneously evicting people, making sure that they're only evicting people in circumstances that it's absolutely necessary.
I can see that perspective. I'm also concerned that by implementing such strict regulation, it might disincentivize development or any other units coming on the market, making it even tighter, making the housing market even tighter. That was more of a comment than a question.
And it's something that, obviously we discussed in our planning meeting last week, as being an area that we want to study this year. And when you look at the zoning plan, the community plan, the changes that undoubtedly are going to come to our community, I'd very much like to study the impact of those plans on people that are living second floor above, the first floor, commercial business or whatever, the buildings coming down, those people being displaced. So in addition to just evictions, I'd like to look at that and see what kind of solutions we building complex. But I want to make sure we do take care of the people that are currently living there. And for that matter, operating business was on the first floor, assuming the whole building is to go away. Are there other questions from council members?
I'd like just a quick clarification. You or your organization didn't have any specific recommendations for the North Fair Oaks community. It was for San Mateo as a whole. Is that my understanding? Or were there specific recommendations for the North Fair Oaks that community that you would endorse or you'd like to propose that you're proposing as part of this?
No, we specifically did not make recommendations, at least for zoning for the North Fair Oaks community. Things like just cause protections would, I think, they're most relevant for North Fair Oaks, where the majority of development is going to occur in like pre-existing residential areas. But that's still a countywide policy. So yeah, we're not making specific proposals for North Fair Oaks.
And the reason, like Jeremy said earlier, the reason we didn't have specific proposals is because we want the community feedback, the local community feedback, and so we didn't feel comfortable without folks from North Fair Oaks giving us some kind of guidance on what is most relevant or needed in your community, that we didn't want to make proposals without that local knowledge. But we're definitely always welcoming of your guys' ideas, and anything that we can support, we'd love to add that to any of our recommendations.
Thank you.
Kathleen?
I think part of the presentation that we should really focus in on is that they're trying to make sure that all of new housing just doesn't get dumped into North Fair Oaks because we have the most land that could be redeveloped, and it's not fair. So I'm grateful to the Housing Leadership Council for acknowledging that just because we have the land doesn't mean that we rip apart North Fair Oaks to put all the housing in, when there's other parts of the county that should share in the responsibility of fair housing for all. So I'm grateful for them for recognizing this is not North Fair Oaks.
And there's also, sorry, just to kind of piggyback on your comment, there's an equity issue with only putting the rezoning in North Fair Oaks, right? There's a requirement to affirmatively further fair housing, which means that housing should be spread out throughout the county, and the housing needs don't just exist in North Fair Oaks, right? There's communities on the coast side that need housing. There's communities in North County that need housing. So there's an equity issue to that concern as well.
Other questions from council members? I had one that was just kind of curious to me. I was wondering why Peninsula Golf and Country Club is listed as a potential site for rezoning and not the other private clubs that are within San Mateo County. Is there something about Peninsula that makes it more attractive than other private golf clubs?
I was looking at a map of unincorporated land that seemed like it was convenient and somewhat urban, and that Peninsula Golf Club fit the bill.
I thought that was part of the city of San Mateo, I believe. Okay, my mistake. Thank you.
It's a weird, like, it's just like one patch of unincorporated land.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, no more questions from council members. I have agendized an item on here. We can actually make a motion on this item. Ask the board to consider the input of the Housing Leadership Council to any revisions made. The county housing element undoubtedly will be made. I think Will would agree with me. So if someone would like to make that motion, we can proceed.
The chair, will we allow opportunity for public comment?
Yes, we should. Thank you very much. The hour is getting late. I'm rushing through my agenda. Is there any public comment on this agenda item?
During this time, members of the public, if you wish to comment on agenda item number 5, Housing Leadership Council perspective, please bring a speaker slip up to the clerk during this time. You will be granted 2 minutes to speak. Last call for public comment. There are no public comments at this time. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Deanna. And to my prior point, would someone like to make a motion to that effect, to ask the board to consider the input of the HLC in their revision of the housing element?
I'd like to make a motion. Proposal.
That the board consider. Yes. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Claire, no. Okay. Motion passes with Council Member, Vice Chair Whitney as a no. Move on to report outs, supervisor's report. Do we have someone from the supervisor's office here this evening? I don't believe we do. No. County Executive's report. Welcome back, Justin.
Good evening, everybody. Good to be back with you. Just a few announcements for you all. Effective April 1st, the county's new minimum wage ordinance goes into effect. This is increase the minimum wage in the unincorporated areas $1 above the current state minimum wage. So it would go from $15.50 to $16.50 effective April 1st. That has gone out on communication channels this week. There'll be ads in papers around the county, multi-language papers that employers are aware. And there's also a website where employers can download a bulletin that to post in employee areas. That rate is linked to a CPI index and will be updated annually and will be available on the website. The next announcement about the NFO Economic and Employment Center. I know you all have had multiple presentations on that. Work is getting underway. We're still looking for a storefront or along Millfield Road for the staff to sit, but those Renaissance and Job Train are fully staffed and are starting their listening tour as well as some early trainings for entrepreneurs. So that work is getting underway. You may also see soon some community outreach regarding designs for a potential bike and pedestrian overcrossing for the tracks. This was something that is highlighted in the North Fair Oaks community plan, is exploring a bike ped crossing of the tracks, which, as you know, there are limited opportunities, and those tracks really do split North Fair Oaks into two different areas. So you'll be seeing some outreach. Hopefully, you'll be seeing some outreach in the community on that to get community feedback on the alternative designs that are that have been developed. Finally, she could be anywhere in the world, but on her birthday, Diana is here because she's dedicated to that. Appreciate Diana as a happy birthday.
Thank you very much, Justin. Vice Chair Whitten, for that.
I think we were. Yes, I just wanted to continue to give some advertisement to a youth conference that's going to be held in Kenyatta College by the organization OYE. A lot of our organizations in North Fair Oaks are participating, including the studio of San Mateo County. And it's a great event for all our youth between 12 and 22 years old. It's a free event this Saturday, March 25th, between 9 and 3 p.m. at Kenyatta College. Thank you very much.
I know we spoke about this a little bit last week in terms of studying traffic patterns and whatnot, but I would like to report out that, I've been talking with some of my neighbors in the area. There has been a significant increase in traffic on 6th Avenue. It's a neighborhood street with the chicanes and generally not considered a thoroughfare, but there are a lot of people using it to cut through the neighborhood, and especially at a higher than normal speed. So again, either they're just not paying attention and so we're seeing a lot of that, and just wanted to kind of make a note of that and see if there's anything that we can look into in maybe a future session, or to ask somebody like from the county to come and take a look to see if there's something there on what's causing that. I know there's some construction on Middlefield and blocking off, but there's no specific detour signs kind of indicating that. And so I think there's a lot of overflow that's happening in that area. And so it's getting worse. So
Seems like Fifth Avenue is getting worse too, so that's why
They're closed off both sides of the road.
and then today there was an accident. They need to be done.
again, I mean, not an objection for people using SIGs, but I think people are getting used to it and traveling at a higher than expected speed for a neighborhood. And so the traffic calming isn't working as it should be. And so it's a concern for the neighbors, I'll put it that way.
There are a lot of interruptions right now with the Millfield Road project, but I'll share those concerns with others.
Thank you.
Anything else?
That's all.
Councilmember Daley, Kathleen? Anything from George?
I do. You mentioned you would be sharing the traffic issue, the construction project. Can you also, maybe off topic, and I'm still figuring things out here because I'm new. Considering they're closing traffic off on both sides, businesses there between 3rd and 5th Avenue are struggling for the day. is there any funding, any resource, anything, grants that could help them out to keep them going?
Yeah, this has come up in prior meetings, and I'm happy to update you that all of the businesses along Middlefield Road and actually the entire Middlefield Road area have been eligible for either two $5,000 grants or one $10,000 grant. It is in connection with pandemic impacts, but we did do a lot of specific outreach to businesses along Middlefield Road so that they would be aware of these resources for them, particularly during this current period where Middlefield Road project is ongoing. So there have been outreach efforts on that. We also have a dedicated staff member of our Office of Community Affairs who meets regularly with all businesses, helps them navigate some of the logistical impacts of the Middlefield Road project, including setting up places to do deliveries if your driveway is blocked for a certain period of time. And there's been a lot of instances of changing dates that don't work for a certain business for a certain reason. So trying to help at least to some degree soften the impact of some of the, obviously the closures are still very impactful, but doing our best to try to work through those issues. But those economic resources have been also made available to the businesses.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I think you're right, they have been. I think there was a cutoff date for some of those economic benefits where you had to have a business in 2021, I think.
You did have to have pandemic impacts, yeah.
That doesn't apply to current businesses that shut off the road on both sides on Middlefield Third. So what's being done now? Because they're out of business.
The impacts on the businesses for the Middlefield Road project have been a big consideration. They're trying to get the job done as quickly as possible. We don't have funds available specifically to help private businesses during that time, other than the programs that are existing. But if you have specific conditions and situations that you want to make us aware of, we're happy to reach out to those businesses.
Okay.
Anything else? George,
Sounds good on my side. Thank you.
Just a couple things for me. I messaged primarily for the council. I still need to edit that we created last week with our plans for 2020. That'll be our working document here. I'll put that together in a form that we can work on, get it out to you as soon as possible. The other thing I wanted to follow up on the public comment from earlier with regard to parking. When the question was asked, it was with regard to the 6th Avenue lot split development. So I believe I just wanted to make sure that members of the public are aware that parking is one of the issues that the council agreed is something we have to look at on a community-wide basis this year. It's an issue in residential areas. It's certainly an issue in our commercial areas. We're going to pursue ideas, alternatives to hopefully make that better this year, working with county staff. So I just wanted to address that and make sure where that is indeed a concern of the council this year. With that, I'd like to thank our presenters this evening. I'd also like to thank Michelle and the press for attending. And as always, thanks to our county staff, Emma, Ken, Deanna, Josh, Teresa tonight, Jennifer, and Justin and Tim for their support. Our next council meeting will be a regular session on April 27th, 2023. I believe we'll be back at the community center. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, so until then, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.